I remember go school, the social, they used to call me Mfano Kubu Putatoti. I came from that part of the world.
That was a joke.
So, when you study journalism, there's a module called political science. It introduces you to politics, the different ideologies that exist, communism, socialism, and you name them. So after that, I practiced a bit as a journalist, mainly in Mahike. And I got to cover a lot of events in the provincial legislature. At the time, Kosima Ngope had reinvented himself and was leading a very slender caucus in the legislature as the official opposition. So I used to observe him, during debates, especially after State of the Nation address. Premier Monewa would have spoken about the plans for the year, and opposition parties get a shot to, weigh in on whatever plans the government has. So I got exposed to a bit of his politics now as a grown-up and as a learned person who understood politics and who had studied news reporting. And then one day it just hit me that, no man, there is this remarkable story about this gentleman, and yet there's not a single book out there about him. I mean, he did publish a book, but it was just a compilation of his speeches. It wasn't a story, telling us who he was, where he came from, what influenced his politics, and so forth. And I, as a consumer of political literature locally, I also felt that the story of our transition from apartheid to democracy was not told in full. It was always told from the perspective of the liberators, those who were at the forefront of the liberation struggle, to the exclusion of others. And I'm one person who has always felt that a story, if it is worth telling, should be told irrespective of how we view the subject. In other words, if you are of the view that the subject was a villain or a hero, it doesn't matter. The story must be told if it is worth its salt. So at that point, I took it upon myself to tell Kosima Ngope's story in text, relying on my training as a journalist, but also my proximity to him, in a sense that we come from the same village, we know the same people there. I know a lot of people that I could go to for access to information as part of my research and all of that. And now this brings me to this book. I wrote to him, I think, around 2013, after I was introduced to one of his children. And she told me we were unlikely to succeed because many people, including very experienced authors and journalists, had went to his house to ask for permission to document his life story in text, and he had turned them down, typically telling them that, my work speaks for itself. I don't have to put it in a book or anything of that sort. But we still went ahead. I wrote to him. The first year passed nothing, and then I wrote to him again circa 2014, and at that point he responded. And in my letter to him, I requested two things. Firstly, I requested his blessings to document his life story, and secondly, I needed a long, no holds barred interview with him. In his response, he just gave me his blessings. He kept quiet about the interview. So, but I kept pushing. I kept going to his house to ask for the interview and all of that. On one of those days, I was given access to him. And then after that meeting, I knew that I should forget about the interview. I suppose I started the project way too late because at that point, he was losing his mind. I later learned that he was senile. He had dementia. So he forgot a lot of things. He got confused when talking to you, and I document some of those things in one of the chapters in the book. And it was then that I resolved that I was going to rely on secondary sources. So I got access to his children Virtually all of them sat down with me and we had lengthy interviews. I got access to his only surviving sibling, Mr Oupa, who's based in Mafeking. And on a couple of occasions we sat down, we spoke at length about their upbringing, how their parents were, and all of that. But I also got access to people who worked with him, who were ministers in the Buputazona government, people like Bontate Sihume in the Free State, Bontate, the name has escaped me, but you'll find them at the back of the book, all the people that I interviewed, some of them deputy ministers, some of them ministers. I then got access to people who served with him in the United Christian Democratic Party, which was a rebranded version of a party that ran the government of Buputazwana. This is the party that he was representing those times when I covered events in the legislature in the Northwest. So I spoke to all those people, but I also spoke to other people who were not necessarily in the Buputazwana government or in the UCDP, but were allies of him, like the late Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi traveled to Cape Town, met him in his parliamentary office. We spoke at length. I got to speak to F.W. de Klerk before he passed away and gathered a lot of information from there. But I also spoke to people from the ANC. I spoke to Dade Andrew Mlangeni before he passed away. I spoke to the likes of Dade Popo Molefe, Matthew Sposa, and so forth. So I spoke to a lot of people to try and understand this man's personality, his politics, and all of that. But other than the interviews, I also relied a lot on archived information. So I spent a lot of time in libraries, Wits Library, the National Library here in Tshwane, the library at UNIVO, at the University of the Northwest in Mahikeng. And once upon a time I got lucky and I traveled, while I worked for the public protector, I traveled to New York and I was there for a week. One day we were off, we didn't have much to do. So when other people went shopping, I went to Harlem and then this library there which preserves stories of black leaders across the world. And I spent time there to gather information there. I relied on other things like reports, official reports, court judgments, and so forth. So that's just to say the research was extensive. I even traveled at some point to the US, this time at my own cost, to meet a gentleman called Timothy Peary. Timothy Peary and Rocky Malabane Metsing planned and executed a coup in Buputazwana in 1988. Timothy Peary was the soldier, Rocky was the politician. The plan was to topple Kosibangopo so that Rocky can take over. So we spent hours and hours reflecting on those things as I was gathering information for this book. So what is this book really about? And this question arises from some of the conversation I often see on social media. This book is not about Buputazwana. It's about a man. And why I'm saying this, people need to understand that there was Kosima Mope long before the idea of Buputazwana was born. And there was Kosima Mope long after Buputazwana ceased to exist. So it is a womb to the tomb account of the man's life, where he was born and where it all ended for him. In fact, it even goes before he was born, because there was a time I spent time in Botswana learning about his family heritage, because they can be traced all the way to Botswana. In fact, when you go to Botswana, there is the Bahurutsi Bomanyane there, just like us on this side of the border, we are called the Bahurutsi Bomanyane. It's a 300-pager, and I broke the story down into 7 parts, all in all 32 chapters. And those 7 parts, the first one, Genesis, which is like your early years, where you come from and all of that. And the breakout, which shows when he transitions into a man and is introduced into leadership, because his father was a traditional leader, he took over from him. Of course, there are politics there, because their legitimacy on the throne is contested, but he was the chief of Motswedi. And his father too was also called Lucas Manyani Mangope. So he shares the name with his father. And then we go to the part that is titled The Curious Case of Moputatswana. That's where you get the Moputatswana story from start to finish. And then there's a part called The Days of Reckoning. This Days of Reckoning stems from the Square Commission of Inquiry. I don't know if anyone knows about that. The Square Commission of Inquiry in the mid to late 90s was about holding Nkosi Mangube for alleged wrongdoing during his stint as Moputatswana president. And also under that part, you find a chapter that focuses on the criminal trial, because on the strength of the adverse findings of the Square Commission of Inquiry, he was charged with fraud and theft, and he was convicted and sentenced. But he never served a day in jail, because the sentence was that he could either serve time in jail or pay a fine, and he chose to pay a fine. And then there's a part about behind drawn curtains that goes into his private life, away from the politics. And under each of these parts, there are several chapters. Then you have, before behind drawn curtains, there is the second coming. That's when, after the criminal trial, he reinvents himself, coming back to mainstream politics, because after 1994, his family had taken the decision that he should lay low for as long as possible, because some of the people who served with him in Moputatswana had been killed. One of them, Rekali, who was necklaced while his daughters were watching. So his family decided just lay low forever. But then some people came to Motswedi to persuade him to get back into the thick of things. And that's why you will see in 1994 he never contested the elections. He only contested in 1999. And some people felt that if he had contested in 1994, he may have very well sat in the original GNU, which consisted of the National Party, the IFP, and the ANC. But when he came back in 1999, he was what you would call politically damaged goods, because the court judgment had dealt a blow to his character, and he lost a lot of elections, a lot of support, which translated in the loss of that 1999 election, which rendered him an opposition leader in the Northwest government. And of course, the last part then, which details the last days, is called Sunset, and there are several chapters there that document that time when I got to interact with him, seeing him senile and all of that, leading up to his death. So this is a political thriller, if you want. It's a historical thriller. You find several themes there: success, failure, betrayal, violence. There's a lot of violence in here, because some people don't know this. Nkosi Mangube, 3 of his siblings, sisters, were each killed by their own children in a very violent manner. Some were shot, some were beaten to a pulp until they passed away, and all of this. So there's a lot of violence in here, but there's a lot of strife, political strife, betrayal, backstabbings, there's tragedy, there's drama. So if you are into that kind of thing, you should definitely consider laying your hands on a copy of this book. I think I'll stop there for now and then engage on the rest of the issues. Thank you so much, sir. Most of the questions that I've written here. So yeah, I've read the book. The book is fascinating. It's very fascinating. Sure. Yeah, let me ask you this question. Like when Mangube was growing up, I remember I read when his father reprimanded him. He stole, I think, mengus or something. And his father said to him, the son of a Khosi doesn't steal. Whatever you take illegally for yourself deprives your people of their means of life. He backed, you are responsible for the well-being of each community members. So basically,
this man, from a very young age, he was trained to become a king. A 10-year-old, at the age of 10, his father taught him how to trade. And then he was taught agriculture by the missionaries. Can you expound on his upbringing, him going to St. Peter's to join ANC, be lectured by these ANC politicians and all that? Yeah, just his upbringing, the young Mangope growing up in Motswedi, being trained as a king to be. Imagine the 10-year-old Bamogoluma to become a king.
Yes, so like most people his age at the time, when he was young, one of his responsibilities was to take care of his father's livestock. So in Motswedi, you have the one side of the village that is where you find all the residences. And then on the other side, that's where agricultural activities used to take place, both crop and stock farming. Most of it, if not all, subsistence farming, not commercial. And the story goes, one day he was returning from the fields after a day's work attending his father's livestock, and it was hot and he was thirsty. So as he was walking back home, he passed by the fields owned by members of the community, and he noticed that there was what do they call this thing? Watermelon,
Yes.
yeah, and then he helped himself to that fruit, and he enjoyed it. Someone saw it, and then they reported him to his dad, who was the chief. And then obviously the dad was beside himself because he was raising a person who was going to succeed him. So he needed to instill in him principles that he hoped that he would hold on to as he grows into being a man. And you will see somewhere later in the book, I also refer to that same story. And that was just me wondering out loud to say, as he was sitting in the dock in the Mamato High Court, and Judge Manning was reading the judgment, which found that he had stolen money from the people and all of that, I wondered if that image of his father telling him, "You can't do this," revisited him in that moment as he had his head bowed in court and all of that. But anyway, you talk of St. Peter's. He went to St. Peter's after completing primary education in Madrid. St. Peter's was a missionary school in Rosettenville, Johannesburg. And there he was a student of Oliver Tambo. Oliver Tambo was himself a product of that school, and he had gone to Fort Hare to study, and he was expelled and all of that. But he went back to St. Peter's and taught maths and physics there. And Mr Oupa was one of his students. And one of the people who were at the school at the same time was Ndape and he shared with me a great deal about their experiences on campus. One of the things he told me was that him and his clique, as township boys, they looked down on fellow learners who came from rural areas like Kosimangop, and they called them names, Skapi, Muhu, and all of that. But when you look at Kosimangop, despite that unfriendly environment at school, he distinguished himself at St. Peter's as a leader in the making. He was elected by both learners and teachers to be the prefect, and then essentially the custodian of the rules that applied to all of the residents of the hostels at that school. And during his stay there, O.R. Tambo used to, after school, take a few of them and, for want of a better word, indoctrinate them in ANC Youth League ideals. Remember, ANC Youth League was not always seeing eye to eye on the approach to the struggle with the motherboard. They wanted the armed struggle and all of that, and the older generation wanted to talk, but talks were taking too long, and the youth was impatient. So Ower Tambo was part of that youth, and those are some of the ideas he instilled in the likes of Mr Oupa. I did not find any evidence in my research that he was an actual member of the ANC. What I do know and what I found out was that he did attend some of those meetings. In fact, on one evening while attending such a meeting, the meeting took long, late into the night, and there was a curfew. So they got into a confrontation with the police, who demanded to know what were they doing out in the street after the curfew, and he was punished for that. But that's the long and short of what transpired. I don't want to spoil it for people, but the entire story, you'll find it in the book. Thanks.
Yeah, no, really tshwara half clash. I get you guys have to buy the book. So really tshwara half clash. What fascinates me about the former president, we are zooming into his leadership, his wisdom, besides the fact that he had a vast land compared to other homelands. Actually, there's a debate where actually Bophuthatswana was a monarchy, not a homeland. So there's that debate on the internet. Or no, actually it was a monarchy run by Khosi, who was the president. So what fascinates me is his wisdom to build an economy from scratch. From scratch, there was nothing. It was just the bundus, and he built the economy from scratch. Him partnering Lesol Kesna, them building Bosan City, Sun International Action, Bo Carousel, Go Amanskrali, Bo Mabatosan, all these casinos, them building casinos. White people going into Bophuthatswana, to look for a job. White people were going to Bophuthatswana to look for a job. Abo pilot or once again, and then I'm just fascinated by and then them taking the money at the casino and building schools. By the way, there are many schools in Bophuthatswana than any other province. So his wisdom of the economy, not just politics, but there was 90% of employment. I remember my mom was working go the firm. So the firm, the industrials were for people who were not that educated. So my mother by then, she was not yet educated, so she was working in the industrials. I remember Abahoti, she would come with 12.5 the vegetables. They were giving them food as well as a form of payment. They were not 350. There was something. So I'm just fascinated about his wisdom. Can you expound?
So, Jose Mangope, when Bophuthatswana gained nominal independence on the 6th of December 1977, he sought to create a territory within South Africa, which would be the opposite of mainland South Africa. Mainland South Africa was, a white man's land. It was run by the white minorities, right? So he wanted to create a territory that was going to be the opposite of what was happening in mainland South Africa. So the first thing he did was to repeal all the laws that were applicable in South Africa and introduce what looked like progressiveness or progress in Bophuthatswana. For instance, just a typical example, And Trevor Noah speaks about this thing. In South Africa, you couldn't marry across the color line. If I was a black man in love with a white woman, it would be a crime for me to get it on with her. But in Muputatswana, that was not an issue. You could marry across the color line, and that was after he did away with that law and then introduced. In fact, when you look at the constitution of Muputatswana, you could even go as far as to say parts of it were modeled around the Universal Human Rights Declaration, which influenced our own constitution here. It had a Bill of Rights and all the things that you find in the constitution. We even had a public protector in Muputatswana. He was called an ombudsman at the time. Yes. So that was him trying to say, here we are free. You know, there's no racism here and all of that. And he relaxed a lot of things. You mentioned Sun City. In South Africa, things like gambling were outlawed. But when he started this country called Muputatswana, he did away with that and then introduced regulated gambling as a way of raising revenue for development purposes. That's why you had the Sun Cities of this world. They were casinos, and people, especially white people, who had a thing for gambling but knew they couldn't do it in South Africa. They would drive into Botswana, spend time in Sun City, and gamble the evenings away there. But from all of that, he raised capital. But of course, a lion's share of Botswana's budget came from South Africa. Naturally, because South Africa established Botswana. So, you know, those baby steps, they had to rely a lot on what was coming from South Africa. But you must also understand that Botswana was distinguished in a sense that it had mines in the Rustenburg area. And then they were generating a lot of revenue from tax, by way of tax from those mining activities as well. So they took all of those monies and developed the country. And people were also involved. So there was this thing called Letsema. And then you call upon each family to contribute. That's how UNIPO, the university, was built. People had to contribute to augment the budget that was coming from the government side. They built Radio Bob TV, manpower centers, Mabana that you spoke about earlier, the agricultural colleges, and so forth. They built infrastructure in the form of schools, clinics, hospitals, roads, and all of that. That's why people often look at Botswana and they feel that it was the crown jewel among the homelands. Because if you look comparatively, it appeared to be head and shoulders above the rest, including some African countries like Botswana. Botswana didn't come anywhere close to Botswana in terms of development. So when people look at those things, you will hear the sentiment coming up that Botswana was ahead of its time and all of that. I mean, when they formed Radio Bob, for instance, it gave Radio Metro a run for its money, such that the SABC started poaching from them. So if you look at Bob Mabena, you will find that he came from Radio Bob. Teach Mataz, Notemba Nodumo, Glenn Lewis, all these people came from there to swell the ranks of the lineups, what we know today as Metro FM. So there was a lot happening there in Botswana. There was a lot of development and all of that. But each time I tell this side of the story, I like to balance it to say the progressives looked at it and said, yeah, we see all that development. But for us, it's not something we can clap hands for. Why? Because it is a product, direct product of this system that we are fighting. So there was always that contention between those who felt that this represented progress and those who felt that it was some form of regression. So that is in the long. The long and short of it. That's what Mr Oupa did in the 17 years that Botswana existed.
Sure. That is so insightful. Yo, what information. Can I have a memo? 7:30, we are on time. I'm going to open the floor for the people to ask questions. We're gonna take questions. I want to ask the last two questions. Just to add, you have been talking about guys like Bob and Louis who are products of Bob TV. You know, Mangope developed people. He developed people like Bo George Manyosi. They are product of Bob TV, Bo Melanie Bala, Bo Bruce Bito, Bo Penele Biani, Bo Segalwe Mogotsi, the late. You know, a lot of people. Even when I go to SABC to do some interviews, like the technical team there, the product is a Bob. So like SABC guys, the technical guys there, but how Bob? So, but a great leader produce people. But if you are planning for a year, you plant crops. If you are planning for 10 years, you plant trees. And if you are planning for a lifetime, you educate and train people. So that's what Rekhosi Lucas Manyane Mangope did. Question number 1. This one is a funny one. Why did he kill 600,000 donkeys? And then I'm fascinated by this story. When there was a coup, there were 50 rebels with the R4 rifles pointing at him. And then he called on his God. 50 rebels at gunpoint, and he sang a hymn. Modimo wa boikanyo, re ikanya mo go wena. Modimo wa boikanyo, re ikanya. I get more of crowd here. Sharp. And then miraculously, God came through for him. He survived the coup. Gaddafi didn't survive the coup. Go trans guy, Barakiman, that guy, that leader. He didn't survive the coup. There was bloodshed. A lot of people didn't survive coups because coups, rebels, a coup are well-trained soldiers. Well-trained soldiers. So yeah, we're gonna open the floor now for questions.
So the story goes that there was a time in Bupitazona where the government felt that the pastures for livestock were not sufficient for all sorts of animals. That's the official line. They said they would rather have the productive livestock like cattle, goats, sheep, and all of that, having access to pastures than the donkeys, because they felt that the donkeys were not contributing anything. But the other people would say there was a time when the first lady, Melia Mangope, nearly had a motor accident or rather she had a motor accident that nearly claimed her life, and a donkey was at the center of that accident. So those who say, who tell that story, say that's why the donkeys were killed. But the official line from the government was about pastures and production and so forth. And it's interesting you talk about this because one of the songs from the struggle that my grandmother hated to hear us playing in my cousin's studio was the one that had to do with the donkey. The donkey diapo, go put that one. The donkey diapo, go put that one. The pokela manyani. You know, that was Blondie McCann. And my grandmother hated hearing that song. Not necessarily because he he had a thing for the president or something. If you were heard playing those songs, you'd be in trouble in Mozambique. There were these guys who, in their wisdom, they thought they were protecting the president, and they took it upon themselves to brutalize people who held different views to that of the president. But to your second question about the coup. So you remember I mentioned that I had to travel halfway across the world to meet the soldier who planned that coup and executed him. This guy, so firsttly, both this soldier and Rocky Malabadi, they pledged allegiance to Kgosi Molutlegi ko Phokeng. And if you remember, Kgosi Molutlegi was opposed to the government of Kgosi Mangophe. That's why he had to go to exile in Botswana, leaving his wife Mesemani, and then she was herself harassed by the Botswana government. And then in his absence, Kgosi Mangophe installed someone of his choice to hold the fort or to be the king of the Bafokeng nation, the royal Bafokeng nation. And after 1994, when the real king came back, this person was toppled, and then the king assumed his throne. So they pledged allegiance to him. And in fact, Malebane Metin claimed to me that when he was, executing that coup and all of that, he was acting in line with the plan that they had along with Kgosi Molutlegi. Anyway, so the soldiers were told that. So in Mabatu, there is a gated community where Bophuthatswana members of the executives, ministers, and the president lived, much like we have here in Pretoria. I don't know what is the name of that gated community where the president and Matlambandlo, but there's another side where the ministers stay. It was something like that. So these soldiers who were participating in the coup were told that they will be broken into small groups of 3 or 4 each. And then each group was assigned a minister's house. And then they were told that on the sound of a whistle, they must shoot at the doors and kick them open, capture whoever is inside, and frog march them to the stadium, which is not far from where that place is. So this soldier that I interviewed was part of the group that captured Kgosi Mangophe. They found him in his pajamas, barefoot, and then they arrested him and frog marched him to the stadium, and it was raining that morning. And then they had with them letters. So they wrote letters of resignation for each of the ministers and the president. And the demand was that they must sign those letters to say, I'm resigning as president of Bophuthatswana, I'm resigning as minister of Bophuthatswana. And then once the coup was over, they were going to hold up those letters as evidence that these people left on their own, were taking over. But Kgosi Mangophe, in his case, he refused to sign the letter. And they lined him up on the wall in some sort of military execution. And they had those guns trained on him, and they told him, resign, or we either shoot you or we douse you with a flammable substance and we'll set you alight alive. And then he told them, over my dead body, will I sign this paper? You rather kill me. And they didn't have the guts to make do or live up to their own threat. And then that's how he ended up in the stadium in a suit under the guard of these armed rebels. And then it was in that moment that he asked everyone to pray with him. And then he broke into song singing that he Mudimu Wikanya. And then I spoke to a couple of people who were in there. One of the ministers was the one I referred to earlier, the one based in the Free State. And also arrested with them were 4 soldiers who had been seconded from the SADF in South Africa to go help establish a military in Bophuthatswana. So they were also arrested, they were in there. So I spoke to one of them, And then they all shared the same story that he prayed, and then after that prayer, some of the rebels who were tasked with, watching over these people, these prisoners of war, they felt bad. They started saying, we are only following orders. And he is said to have referred to them as my children. And that nearly softened them up. And in that moment, that's when one of the soldiers that was arrested was able to grab a gun from one of those rebels while they were dazed. And then that's how they were able to escape. They managed to scare the rebels, and the rebels went out of that confinement. So they were no longer under arrest, as it were. And then one of them was able to find a phone line and call the embassy, call South Africa, tell them this is happening. And that's how the border government came to save him.
Yeah. No, I give credit to God in this scenario here. Can we have the raise of hands? We're going to take questions. Questions with the raise of hands. Let's start at the back.
Mr Oupa Segalwe. So, questions, I'm actually here on behalf of my dad. He would have loved to see you, Manhazoka, but I'm so proud and I'm excited about this book launch because so finally the day is here. Now on the question, Mr Oupa is highly contested by different kind of people. Along they talk positively about him, others have a negative impact, and I just want to know how do you hope the readers will perceive it, and how has the feedback been to those that have read it after reading Buka ya Gago? And the second question, for someone who is a writer and would love to just, who's interested in writing something like this complex historical stories or figures of events, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Mosadi, for that question. You are right. I think I made this point earlier. The Oupa's legacy is very contested, and people are split down the middle, half and half. You find those who say he was dead, and others who say he was this. Now, in writing this story, I was guided by the principles that underpin my profession, journalism. In journalism, we strive for three things mainly: truth, accuracy, and balance or fairness. Truth just means that if Ntatera Musa, as one of my sources, comes and says, no, he did this, and that, I don't take his word for it. I must go and find corroboration, independent of him. And then once you get corroboration, someone corroborating what he says, and documents also confirming that, then I can rest assured that what I'm writing is truth, right? Then accuracy. Accuracy just means getting things correct the first time. If we see this coup happened in Mabato at that gated community, and then they went to the stadium, I must get those things right, and then I must verify to make sure that whatever I put in the book is correct, it's accurate. And then balance means you must balance views. If I were to give you an example, as a news reporter, let's say these two people were famous people, because we don't write about just anyone in news. There's a news value called prominence. So if now, because I'm not prominent, if I fall ill and then I'm hospitalized, it's not a news story. But if the president gets hospitalized, it's a news story. So let's say these two people were famous, and this one alleges that he slapped her across the face. I can't just go with her version when I report about this gentleman's alleged violent conduct towards her. I must also give him a right of reply. I must call him and find out what he says. And oftentimes he's likely to deny it and say, no, it was self-defense. So my responsibility in that moment is to put both versions in the story and leave it to the reader to make up their minds. But the moment I go with this version alone, I become unfair to him. Or if I go with his version alone, I become unfair to her. So that's what the balance I refer to it. So we see a lot of that in the book. There are people who told me, especially when I was dealing with rural politics. There's a guy who was a lifelong enemy of Osman Obey. Say, no, this man was dictatorial. He would make us work, and at some point there was this pregnant woman who was made to work in terrible conditions, and then she gave birth right there under the tree, and we reported this, but nothing was done. But then you find another person from exactly the same village who says, no, Kosimangope brought development to our community. We had a reservoir in Motswedi, we had a tarred road, we had an airstrip, we had a boarding school, we had a double-story primary school building, we had a post office, a police station, things that you couldn't find in other rural villages. So when I document the story, I share both versions, because to opt for one version over the other would be dishonest on my part, because these are things that people saw. So I can't say, no, this one is too dark and all of that. And it created a dilemma for me, because I spoke to his family. When you come into a family as a stranger, working on a project like this, it takes time for them to trust you. It took years and years of working on that relationship, such that they were able to be vulnerable around me and share things that they couldn't share with the next person. So I remember when I was sitting at my computer writing some of these things, I kept on worrying a lot. How are they going to react to this? They're going to feel betrayed and all of that. But I had verified the information, it was true. And at some point I took the decision to say, I will not allow myself to be a prisoner of these relationships, because I'm not being vindictive. I'm writing a story, and it needs to be credible, because if I sweep certain things under the carpet, it will deal a blow to the credibility of the book, because people know that some of these things happen. So I had to navigate that space and see to it that the story is balanced the way I told it. And some of the feedback has been very encouraging, because I've read a lot of reviews from professional book critics and reviewers, and all of them feel that it's a balanced account. It tells the story. Some people tend to put Kosimangope on a pedestal, and hold him so high that he's possibly as close to Christ as possible than most of us. But and I struggle to relate to that, because I don't think even he himself saw himself in that light. I think he understood that he was not perfect, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he brought a lot of development to Mupita. So that's what I hope people will find in the book. Balance. It's not praise singing, it's not character assassination, it's just truth of what happened. And I do not claim that this is a definitive account of his life. You can always pick up a pen and explore an angle I neglected and tell it from a different perspective. Yeah.
The second question.
Sanbanani, Igama Divine. First of all, Babu Segalwe, thank you for writing this book and sharing about Kosimangope, which abantu abaningi vele simazi on the negative side, even though we know there's a good side that is not being shown a lot. So I'm looking forward to the read. It almost gives me the vibe of Obaba Zimbabwe. Mugabe, because I recently, some years ago, read his book. It's like a love and hate kind of a relationship, So thank you for that. And my question, Uguti, I'm curious about the amount of time it takes to write such a deep book. Uguti, how long did it take you? And then also, Uguti, since this book being as regal as it is, did you think about whether some kind of a movie? Because it sounds interesting. Which there's the thriller part, there's good and bad. I was just thinking, which this would make a great movie. So yeah, I'm just curious.
Thank you, man, Divine. No, it took long, eh? It took long. The idea first came in 2011. And then I finished my manuscript in 2021. Why it took long is because it was an on and off project for me. Some people approach publishers in the mainstream before they even put the pen down. Some choose to write and then approach the publisher afterwards. That way you don't write under pressure and all of that. So for me, it was a bit of both. Sometime while researching, I had a couple of chapters down. I decided to approach a publisher, and they rejected my manuscript, and I got dejected from that, and I abandoned this thing. I packed it away. And then because I consume a lot of political literature, every now and then I go into exclusive books. I buy a book, I read. Even when I travel, my favorite thing to do when I travel is to start at the exclusive books at the airport, and then I will be reading during the flight and all of that. But sometimes you go to exclusive books, not necessarily to buy, just see what's out there, and then you pick up a book, you read a few pages while you're standing in the aisle. And after time I would look at this and say, no, but I think I write better than this. And I could not understand why they were rejecting this thing. It was rejected. I approached 7 different publishers. It was only the last 2 who said there's something here that we could explore. The first 5 kept on saying no, no, no. And after each of those, I would get discouraged. That's why it took so long. But also, I struggled with research. Some people, for instance, it took 6 years for him to sit down with me and reflect on his politics, and it was important for me to hear from him because he formed part of a delegation that accompanied Nelson Mandela to go to Botswana to negotiate with Kgosi Mangube to let go of Botswana so that we can go to the 1994 election. So I felt that there was so much I could glean from him to be able to tell the story, but each time there would be this excuse and that excuse. So people like him contributed to the delay, but I'm glad it happened that way. When I first wrote to Kgosi Mangube, I was 28 years of age. Wow. Now I look back and say, yeah, man, I understand why he said, this is what he told his daughter. He says, so I understand because I was wet behind the ear. So I'm glad that it took as long as it did because the material I had then is nothing compared to what I ended up with. And then with regard to your last question about what I say to people who would like to write or move. No, this question is from the lady at the back, Mamusadi. I forgot to mention it. What I would say to people who want to write, just get started. Just get started. Don't worry about the perfection of it. You will edit later. When it happens, you know what I do? Sometimes I struggle with beginning a chapter and I keep deleting what I write because it just doesn't sound right. And then it comes to me when I'm driving and then what I do, I take out my phone safely. It has a recorder and I dictate the approach to the phone. And then when I get home, I transcribe it and then I develop it further. And you know, people who work in the arts, literature is an art form. People who work in the arts, they have got their own things. My own thing is that I never write on a blank Word document. If I write on a blank Word document, it just doesn't come out right. So I open an email window. And then in that moment, it's like I'm talking to this one person whom I'm emailing. And that's when it comes. It just comes. When it's done, I copy it and then I edit it underway.
Nice.
So some people approach it differently. Whatever works for you, works for you. But that for me works for me. It's not just with the book. Even when I write, I've worked as a speechwriter for Advocate Madonsa, Advocate Mukawan, and all of that. All their speeches were started on an email. I would write it there and then develop it further when it's its own way. So what I want to say to you is just get started. And then worry later about perfecting it and all of that. But lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I don't know of any person who writes who does not read. Yeah, you need to read. If you read, you improve your vocabulary, you understand how to approach chapters, you understand how to find an angle and all of that. But if you don't read, you will have a hard time writing. Yeah. And then lastly, the movie. Well, I haven't thought of it that way. Although there are people who have approached me and my publisher, they are not talking movies. They are talking a series on either on Netflix or on Science Major. We don't know if that will come to life, but they have already made contact with the team and they've indicated their interest in that. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to take the last two questions now. I'll stay who and my brother here. Oh, the last one. We give you grace.
My name is Teho Munyamani. When I attended the book launch, so then I got it. And I couldn't wait to dive into it because I grew up, Karangua was part of Kitazoana when I grew up. So everything that the IAT is saying, somehow I was a beneficiary. But then, Batoba Hulu, you hear them talking other things and you don't know, so you are conflicted. My uncles were activists. One even got out, I had anxiety. So misunderstanding until I did my own digging and to understand what is happening. So this book is very rich. That's number one. I appreciate how you were able to get the people that you got here. Unale family, unale bana banda tamamupe, unale sibling, unale the picture, unale how you explain relationship behind them, how you explain what so I like that because sometimes I'm not saying we should not take the glory, but you are nice. Well, you talked about your wife. One level half of the days that you were writing, and she was taking care of the kids, to give you time to put this together. So you are actually appreciating what I couldn't do it alone. I had, and you also talk of your mother and your siblings and blah blah. So yeah, now you went to talk to the siblings. The one sister who's surviving, who also had a fight with him. I think at the end, they were not in speaking terms. So because she came to just say, I'm here. My question is that there's a part where you speak about the rightfulness, shifting. Can you further elaborate on that, number one? Number two, and the family feeling nearly, were they buying into what you're saying? And if you said to them, I'm not gonna glorify the I'm gonna speak the truth, and knowing who your little was really bad, were they keen? Yes, I'm gonna speak about this part of fraud and what like personally, if my father was to be put there, I was gonna do bad because back. No matter whether the truth or not, but how did they take it? But I never said before some and stuff.
Yeah, my brother here.
Thank you, sir.
I think the lady touched on the issue chieftaincy of Mangope, because somewhere in your book you do indicate that Mangope was actually not the right person to take over. And today we all hear about capture and corruption and so on. You are very limited about Ramangope's capture by, there was some overseas guy who was handling all the financial affairs of Mabatu. Maybe if you can touch on that guy, because I couldn't get it clearer. Thank you.
All right, the last question. Oh yeah. Okay, thanks. Minjani igazi antimane emzulwandlela ndikulokholo bana kukulashba ngamtsonga ngahlanzeki. So my question is, I heard you saying you met with that WD clerk to do some research. So to the speaker. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, sir, how was his state when he was giving the information that you were outsourcing there? Because I had the MC where you mentioned something about the history that is being filtered and they chop out some of the things. So I'm interested in knowing that, was he able to deliver the non-filtered information as a white person? Thank you. Okay, the last one.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm probably the youngest person in here, but it's okay. I'm a creative. I sing, I act, I dance. And sometimes I have this thing where when I'm thinking of a piece to act, I create a writer's block. Because I don't then like taking pieces from Google and issues from people like white people that I don't relate to. And also I want to speak to people who are my age and people who are, I would say, in my community, because I am a mixed baby. My mom is partially colored. So they are in the likeness of me. And sometimes even on that thing where I get writer's block and I don't know how to tackle it. I try to listen to music, I try to watch movies, watch series, but it just does not help. How does one, as a creative, as someone who is in art, tackle writer's block? Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the questions. Let's start with Mete. First of all, thank you for buying the book and for reading the story. I was with her last night at another book launch at State Theatre, and she brought that copy with her, and I couldn't help but notice a lot of notes on each page. So I was scared seeing her in the crowd, and she's going to grill the hell out of me. The issue of chieftaincy, it's a very enduring conflict, such that the Northwest government right now is investigating that matter. It's among the disputes of traditional leadership that the Office of the Premier and the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs are investigating to determine who the rightful chief is. So, earlier you may have heard that I said there's some controversy regarding Nkosi Mangope's occupation of the throne. So this is how it happened. Remember I told you I went to Botswana to get exposed to this and that. The long and short of it is that Nkosi Mangope's grandfather, Sibongudi Mangope, was a brother, one of three brothers. The other brother, the eldest, was called Konke. He is the one whose descendants are based in Botswana, Kohamanyani. And then the second brother was called Suping. His other name was Tebe. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Northwest and have traveled to Botswana via Ziras, there's a village just before you get to Botswana. It's called Supingstad. That's where Khosi Suping settled. But all three of them were once based in Botswana, Kohamanyana. Then the brothers fought. There was just no peace between them. And then the ones seceded. Firstly, it was Suping who came and settled there at the place that we now know as Supingstad or Hatene. And then the last one to move away from Kontle, who was the troublesome of the three brothers, was Sibuhudi, who came and settled Komutwe. There's a history around how he came there, but you'll find it in the book. Now, Mangope, the senior, the father to this one, who I said his name was also Lucas Manyani Mangope, was not in line of succession. So you would know that chiefs back in the day, I think they're still doing some parts of the country and outside. They used to marry more than one woman. They were involved in polygamy. So if she was the senior wife, the first wife, it was expected that the heir would come from her house. And then she was the second wife, the heir would not come from there. So Khosi Mangope's father came from that house. And then the eldest son who came from this house was junior to him in terms of age, but was senior in terms of status, right? So when their father died, Sibuhudi died, this one who was in line of succession was still young of age. So this one had to take over as a regent until such time this one comes of age, and then he can then take over. But the story goes that when that time came, this one was comfortable in office and he didn't want to let go. He clinged to power, to office. And he was very powerful at the time because he had established strong relations with the white people who were running the government, the commissioners of this world and all of that. So this one then and his family were exiled from Mutsoidi by Khosi Mangope's father. And this you find in a government report, official government report from 1959. So you had a department called the Natives Affairs Department, which is like your copter. When that vacancy occurred with Khosi Sibuhudi passing away, the government sent an investigator, a very interesting character, who came from Germany. In fact, he had been a member of Hitler's political party. Wow. He came to South Africa as a student at the University of Pretoria on an exchange program, and he ended up working for the Native Affairs Department. So he was the guy who was sent to Mutsoidi to investigate the issues of succession. Initially, his first report was that this one is the rightful chief. But then, after a while, they established that while he was exiled and was working in the mines in Gauteng, he got conscientized and introduced to ANC politics. And then they saw him as a threat because you couldn't take a person from the ANC to go and be a chief there. He was going to spoil everything. That's when they opted for Khosi Mangope's father, despite the fact that he was illegitimate. And then after his passing, the throne never went back to this one. It went to the line of Khosi Mangope, such that even now, Khosi Kwena Mangope is waiting in the wings to occupy that space. The only thing holding him back is this investigation, because those who come from this line, they are now a resident in Kimberley, and they want to come back home to take over what is there. So that's where the whole thing comes from. Yeah. So, and to this day, there are two factions in Mutsoidi: those who back this one and those who back that one. And that's where the dispute is. Then you talk of family. You know, Khosi Mangope's family Rona, as ordinary people, we looked at him and we saw the politician, the chief, right? Bona, they don't relate to him like that. To them, he's their father, he's their uncle, and all of that. So, certain truths about him will not sit well with them. I remember after the book came out, one of his children confronted me and said, "Did you really hate him so much?" Then I asked him, "What do you mean?" He says, "No, you didn't have to reveal some of these things." So she's not denying that they happened. She's saying I should have swept them under the carpet. Fortunately, this person comes from the same background as me. She studied journalism at Rhodes. So I decided to exploit that. I then asked her, and she used to work for Bob TV as a producer, as a journalist and all of that. So I said to her, "So you worked on TV, you even studied TV in the US and all of that. Let's say, for argument's sake, tomorrow you say that I shouldn't have revealed this thing about your father, I should have spoken the nice things only. Let's say tomorrow you are commissioned to do a documentary on President Jacob Zuma." She's very critic of the ANC and all. So I said, if you were commissioned to do that, would you come out with a documentary that says, he was, he couldn't go to school because he was invested in the liberation of the country. He joined the ANC at 13 years of age. He defeated so and so in Polokwane. He introduced free education and exclude the stories about the Guptas, the rape trial, and all of that." And then she kept quiet for a second and said, "I hear what you mean." So in that, I was just trying to show her that when you do this thing, you remove your feelings from it. You become the professional. And then you uphold those principles I mentioned: truth, accuracy, balance. But you go beyond that. You do it without fear, favor, or prejudice. Meaning, you mustn't be fearful that so and so will be touched when they see this thing out. As long as it is the truth, it is accurate, go for it. But you must not be favorable to certain people to say, "Oh, this one I like, I will block out this blemish," because that's when you compromise the product. But you must not go out of your way to be prejudicial to anyone at the same time. So all of those principles are critical when putting together the story. And after we had that conversation, I think she understood why I had to put certain things that she may have deemed unpalatable in the book. And the other thing is that Mr Oupa protected them. He refrained from discussing politics with his children because he understood that politics is a dirty game. So after a day in the office and all of that, the only person he would talk to about those things was his wife. But his children, he just kept them as far away as possible from politics because he knew what politics could do. It could destroy them. So that's how some of them they have embraced the book. They understand why it is the way it is. Others are not very happy with certain things. But the one thing they cannot question is whether or not it's true, because there's ample evidence everywhere that it's like the Sprayer Commission of Inquiry. I do not say whatever was in the report was the truth and whatever else. My role as a news reporter is to say there was a commission of inquiry and it came out with its findings. People will always contest the findings. It's just like they do with the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. They say, no, this was a Zonda Zuma project and all of that. It wasn't about the truth and all of that. But the truth of the matter is that there was a commission of inquiry. There are volumes of volumes in the form of the report produced by retired Chief Justice Zondo, and then journalists' role is to report on what came out in there. If anyone questions the content, they should have taken it on review in the High Court. Similarly, with Mr Oupa's, both actually the Commission of Inquiry and the trial, he never challenged those things. In the Commission of Inquiry, he refused to answer questions, and the report was completed without his version. Now, he has himself to blame for that, because he should have provided his version. It was only in the Buputatswana Supreme Court, or what we call now the High Court, that he put up a defense against the criminal charges and all of that. But even after the sentencing, he did not appeal. You know that trial was concluded in post-apartheid South Africa. In the Constitution, under the Bill of Rights, you have rights that are accorded to accused people. You know, you can get a defense of your own choice. You can appeal or review. You know, you can. You are entitled to have a fair trial in an open court and all of those things. He knew all of that. He had a very competent team led by senior counsel, but he still did not appeal the judgment. So if the man, in my view, if you don't appeal it, you are as good as accepting your fate. So if you didn't appeal it, what are we bickering about? You know, that was just my view on that. I think there are two more questions. I've dealt with the chieftaincy pattern that they pattern. I will go to capture. So there was this gentleman called Shapatai Karmanovich. He came from the USSR. You know that territory that is occupied by Russia. It used to be called the USSR. He came from there, and then he went on to live in Israel at some point, and then ended up in Russia now, in the post-Cold War era. That guy was controversial. First and foremost, he was a spy. And then at some point, he became a double agent, spying for both the Russians and the Israelis. And then when he was caught out, he ran, ended up in Africa. He was involved in blood diamond dealing in Sierra Leone before he came to South Africa. In South Africa, he put up in Sandton, and he set up a construction company called Liat. It was named after her daughter. Her daughter was Liat. And then that guy re-established himself in Buputatswana as a business mogul, especially in construction. So he monopolized the contracts, which were dished out to him without going on tender. So this stadium here called Odi and the one in Mabato were built through contracts dished out to him. But what he would do is that he would subcontract the work and take what he called a management fee. So he never got involved in the actual work. It's not just the stadiums. A lot of shopping centers in Buputatswana, including this one in Harangu, it was built through him as well. As housing developments in Mabopane, in Mafikeng, and all of that. Such that construction companies such as Granica, Stocks and Stocks at some point clubbed together to complain about this guy who was monopolizing all the infrastructure development contracts in Buputatswana. And when you look deeper, he had so much influence over Mr Oupa, which is where the capture comes from. Because then you can draw parallels between him and the Guptas in terms of how he was influential over government decisions and all of that. But when those controversies started getting out of hand, Mr Oupa appointed this guy as some sort of a pseudo ambassador to Buputatswana in Israel, right? You know, Buputatswana was not recognized by any country in the world other than South Africa, Transkei, Ciskei, and Venda as an independent state. The rest of the world did not recognize it, but Mr Oupa was determined to change that, which is why he established pseudo embassies in England, the US, and everywhere else. So this guy became some sort of a pseudo ambassador to Buputatswana in Israel and continued with that kind of thing. So that's the guy that Mphahlele is referring to. And even after Buputatswana, he continued with that kind of lifestyle. He was associated with the underworld in Moscow, such that in 2009, on the 2nd of November, he was killed in the most brutal way, in a hail of bullets, in a drive-by shooting, not far from the office of Vladimir Putin. So that guy was what the was to Khosi Mangophe, what the Guptas were to Khosi, to presidents. I'm almost there. Or the clerk. So the clerk, he was already sick. I made a point in that I started working on the book late. A lot of people were very, ripe in terms of age at the time. So he was sickly. So I was denied an opportunity to sit across the table from him. So the closest thing they could allow me to do was to put down a set of questions in writing and send them to his team. And then he would sit with his team. They answer each question. If I had follow-ups, I would follow the same channel. They answer, and it worked for me because it saved me a lot of time in terms of transcribing interviews because it was already written down. So I just had to, get into that. But he did answer my questions to my satisfaction. Because some of the questions, when you have the opportunity, you also ask questions that you've always wanted to know, even though they are not related to this one. I said to him, not long ago, you said apartheid was not as bad as it looked, and all of that. And then he articulated what he meant there, denying what saying things were twisted, and all of that. But my interest in him was mainly what happened around 94, because he was one of the people that were trying to persuade Khosi Mangophe to challenge his views and participate in the elections and let the Bukutazwana people participate in the elections. And none of them succeeded until they had to overthrow his government. And on Tatile, that's a difficult one. I don't know of any writer who has a solution to a block. So I once asked somebody, by the way, that question. Someone I hold highly when it comes to storytelling through the pen. He looked at me and said, just write, man. And I was disappointed when he said that, but looking back, I think I would say the same thing to you. Just write. Remember I said to that lady at the back that it doesn't have to be perfect. Just put it down, pack it, come look at it again tomorrow, and then it will chisel it into shape as time goes on. But what is important is to move the needle. Just write something. You can give yourself a target to say, okay, today I'm writing 1,000 words. So just go for it. And then as time goes on, you will improve it. That's the best I could say, because there's no cure or remedy for a block. You just need to. They say practice makes perfect. So just write and write on anything. I write in this thing. I write on my phone. I dictate to the phone. I don't wait to get home and say, I don't have my desktop now. It's at home. I write when I get home. When you get home, something else happens, and then you are distracted. But when you are in a bus or waiting for the next class at varsity, and you're sitting there at the cafeteria, an idea comes, just put it down on your phone, and you won't regret it. Thank you.
Sure. Ke rata gore ke a go leboga Re Segalwe for listening to my plea. Ke go kopa ka tswetswe gore kopa o tle kwano ka mo Atteridgeville re tlo launcha buka e ke thomile ke re book discussion ka gore re launchitse ebe ke re no man batho ba ka se rata khanyo ya book discussion a re twiste mantswe re launch. So I thank you very much. We are honored to have you, a man of your caliber, in our midst. I want to thank everybody who is here.
It retails for 350.
Okay.
Yes. But this gentleman back home, in Zeras, we don't have a bookstore.
And you would understand my predicament there. This story is set in Zeras, set in Mahikeng, and yet we don't have bookstores in Mahikeng. So I've managed to negotiate a deal with Pick and Pay in Zeras at least to have the book on its shelves. And the owner of that franchise happens to be very fond of Khosi Mangophe. Khosi Mangophe used to go into his store with his wife and give him a seat there because he was too tired to walk in the aisles. And then the wife would do grocery shopping and then people would mob him, greeting him and all of that. And then they wouldn't be made to pay for the groceries. And then on his birthday, that Pick and Pay bake a cake for him and send it to him. So they had that kind of relationship. Now, that man, as a result, doesn't sell this book for profit. So there is a recommended price for retailers to stock it and then put their markup and all of that. But that guy decided to give back to the community. So he doesn't sell it for profit. So he sells it for us. So I'm saying this to say, these copies that I brought here, I brought very few because you guys are in Victoria. I mean, Main Lane is just here, you have exclusive books there and all of that. You could always get them. So I'll sell this for $300 and take off the 50 if anyone is interested to acquire a copy tonight. Thanks.
All right, let's clap hands for it. Thank you for being patient with us. I would like to ask Apostle Charakupa to close for us with prayer, and then we will be done. Some people are coming from far, like Mama said, you are from Carltonville and all that. So Modimo Arabile Taylor, somebody to Sama.
Hallelujah. Let's bow our heads and pray. Father, I thank you for this good opportunity. Thank you for all presentations. Thank you for the information that you are introducing to your people so that they can give us something very special, something very valuable in our lives. Thank you, Lord. I ask you to bless each and everyone who is here. Lord, lead us as we are now going back to our various places that we stay. Let your glory and your mighty powers and your angels guide us, and also make us to have the interest to buy these books, my God, so that they can benefit in our life and the future generation. I praise you in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You can come this way and get yourself a copy and get a signature. Yeah, this one. Yes. I need a.
I'll see you at the next one. Because yeah, I'm just coming it out. I'm looking at the time. Yes, definitely. I'm going to see for the next one. You should. Thank you for Oh, nice, happy we are all live.
Da, 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 da.